The 47th floor of the Manhattan Financial Tower hummed with the electricity of impending fortune. Victoria Sterling commanded the mahogany conference table like a general surveying a battlefield, her emerald eyes scanning 12 investment bankers whose combined portfolios exceeded the GDP of small nations. Through towering windows, New York City sprawled beneath storm clouds, while somewhere in that concrete labyrinth, her 6-year-old son Mason attended his specialized school. Gentlemen, Victoria's voice sliced through the tension like polished steel. Sterling Biotech's IPO represents more than profit margins. We're pioneering the future of pediatric medicine. The projection screen blazed with golden promises. $200 million in initial offering, $2.8 billion projected valuation, revolutionary treatments for childhood diseases that had claimed too many young lives. Victoria had sacrificed everything for this moment. Sleep, relationships, countless evenings with Mason, positioning Sterling Biotech as America's premier pediatric pharmaceutical powerhouse. Her phone's violent buzzing shattered the boardroom's focus. Riverside Elementary, emergency contact. The room tilted sideways. Victoria's manicured fingers trembled as she answered. Her commanding voice reduced to a whisper. This is Victoria Sterling. Mrs. Sterling, Principal Martinez calling. Mason's had a serious fall down the main staircase. He's conscious but experiencing severe leg pain. We strongly recommend immediate medical attention. The words detonated like grenades in Victoria's chest. Investment bankers blurred into meaningless shapes, their voices fading to white noise. The $200 million deal, 3 years of relentless construction, Sterling Biotech's entire future, everything evaporated. Emergency, Victoria announced, grabbing her coat with shaking hands. Family crisis. She abandoned 12 stunned faces in a presentation worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. 26 minutes later, Victoria exploded through Mount Sinai's emergency entrance, her Louboutin heels striking linoleum like rapid gunfire. Panic had transformed her usually immaculate appearance into disheveled desperation as she navigated Manhattan's brutal traffic. Mason occupied a pediatric gurney, his small frame overwhelmed by surrounding medical equipment. Tears carved silver paths down his pale cheeks, his left leg visibly swollen and twisted. Seeing his mother, his composure crumbled entirely. Mommy, it hurts everywhere, he whispered, extending tiny arms toward salvation. Victoria gathered him close, her heart fracturing at his anguish. I'm here, baby. Mommy's here now. But embracing Mason only intensified the familiar helplessness that had haunted Victoria since his diagnosis 18 months earlier. Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a merciless thief gradually stealing her son's mobility, breath, and ultimately his life. Medical professionals had delivered their brutal verdict with clinical precision. Most DMD patients survived only into their 20s. Excuse me. A warm voice interrupted Victoria's spiraling thoughts. She looked up to discover a man kneeling beside Mason's gurney, wearing faded Navy maintenance uniforms. Mid-30s, perhaps, with compassionate azure eyes and work-roughened hands that spoke of honest labor. His name tag read Daniel Rivers, Facilities Management. Hey there, champion, Daniel addressed Mason with remarkable gentleness. That looks incredibly painful. Can you describe exactly what happened? Mason sniffled courageously. I was walking downstairs and my legs just quit working right. I fell really hard. Daniel nodded with profound seriousness, treating Mason's explanation as the most crucial information imaginable. You're absolutely brave for telling me those details. Understanding what happened helps us figure out how to make you comfortable. Victoria watched, mesmerized, as this stranger, this maintenance worker, examined Mason with thoroughness, rivaling the most accomplished pediatricians. His movements demonstrated practiced precision, testing range of motion, evaluating reflexes, observing subtleties far exceeding custodial training expectations. Daniel, Mason announced suddenly, reading the identification badge with childhood's earnest curiosity. Are you a doctor? The question suspended between them like a loaded weapon. Victoria observed something flicker across Daniel's features. Anguish, yearning, plus an unidentifiable emotion. No, buddy, Daniel replied softly. I'm just someone who wants to ensure you're okay. Yet Victoria's trained instincts caught telltale signs. Daniel's positioning to support Mason's affected limb, the precise angle of his joint mobility assessment, the professional evaluation in his gaze. These weren't a janitor's movements. These belonged to someone with extensive medical expertise. A nurse materialized, clipboard ready. Mason Sterling, Dr. Patterson will examine you in treatment room 7. As Daniel assisted Mason's wheelchair transfer, Victoria found herself studying this enigmatic figure who'd appeared during their crisis. When their eyes connected, she glimpsed understanding depths that stole her breath, the expression of someone who'd occupied her exact position, confronting a child's suffering with equal measures of love and powerlessness. Thank you, Victoria said simply. Daniel nodded, his smile tinged with profound sadness. Take excellent care of that courageous boy. As nurses wheeled Mason toward X-rays, Victoria remained frozen in the corridor, her mind racing with one burning question. Who was Daniel Rivers, really? And why did his touch seem to heal in ways her money never could? 3 hours elapsed before X-rays revealed severe muscle strain without fractures. Victoria carried an exhausted Mason to her waiting limousine, the little boy peaceful despite the day's trauma. Passing the hospital's main entrance, she spotted Daniel Rivers emptying waste receptacles in the lobby. Their gazes met through glass doors. Daniel raised his hand in a small wave, his expression radiating gentle concern. Victoria paused, wanting to voice questions that had no simple answers. The moment dissolved. Her driver opened the car door, and Victoria slipped inside with Mason, the chasm between their worlds suddenly feeling infinite and unbridgeable. As the limousine merged into Manhattan traffic, Victoria stared through the rear window until Daniel's figure vanished completely. She couldn't escape the conviction that their paths were destined to cross again, and that when they did, everything would transform. 5 days later, Victoria stood in her corner office atop the Sterling Biotech Tower, gazing at the city sprawling below like an intricate circuit board of ambition and dreams. The IPO faced another postponement, and board members were questioning her dedication to the company she'd built from nothing. But Victoria's thoughts weren't consumed by quarterly projections or market analyses. They centered on an azure-eyed maintenance worker whose touch had provided Mason comfort she'd never achieved. Mason had changed since the hospital encounter. More animated, more talkative. When Victoria inquired during dinner 2 nights prior, his response had stopped her cold. Daniel made me feel like being sick doesn't make me weird, Mommy. He talked to me like I was just Mason. The statement's simplicity had cut Victoria to her core. How many specialists, therapists, and physicians had treated Mason as a symptom collection rather than a little boy with dreams, fears, and boundless capacity for joy? Victoria's contemplation was interrupted by her assistant's voice through the intercom. Mrs. Sterling, your car is ready for the Mount Sinai board meeting. Victoria had served on the hospital's pediatric advisory committee for 18 months, leveraging her position to advocate for rare disease research funding. Today's meeting felt charged with possibility, answers to questions she hadn't known to ask. An hour later, she sat in the hospital boardroom, half listening to budget discussions and fundraising reports. When the session concluded, instead of heading directly home, Victoria found herself wandering hospital corridors, ostensibly visiting the pediatric ward, but actually searching for a familiar figure in Navy work clothes. She discovered Daniel in the children's oncology section, quietly sanitizing floors outside the playroom. Through the doorway, Victoria observed young patients, bald from chemotherapy, tethered to IV poles, some barely older than Mason, laughing at television cartoons. "The children adore him," a voice said behind her. Victoria turned to find Dr. Sarah Chen, the ward's head nurse, watching Daniel with obvious affection. "He's worked here nearly 2 years," Dr. Chen continued. "Always volunteers for extra pediatric shifts. Never requests overtime compensation. And the children," she smiled tenderly, "they illuminate when they see him. It's as though he comprehends their world in ways most adults cannot." "That's remarkable for maintenance staff," Victoria observed carefully. Dr. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Daniel's unlike most people. There's something about him, a tenderness, a way of perceiving these kids as complete individuals instead of just their diagnoses. Sometimes I believe he'd make a superior pediatrician than half the doctors I know." Before Victoria could respond, chaos erupted from the playroom. A young boy, perhaps 7 years old, had collapsed during play, his small body convulsing on the floor. Dr. Chen rushed forward, but Daniel was already there, moving with speed and precision that stunned Victoria. "Febrile seizure," Daniel stated calmly, cradling the boy's head and positioning him safely on his side. "Temperature spike from the underlying infection. Sarah, we need cooling protocols and—" He stopped mid-sentence, suddenly aware he'd just issued medical directives to the head nurse as if he possessed every right to do so. Dr. Chen stared at him in shocked recognition, and Victoria felt puzzle pieces clicking into place. "Who are you?" Dr. Chen whispered. Daniel's face drained of color. Without answering, he gently transferred the stabilized boy to Dr. Chen's care and walked quickly toward the exit. Victoria followed, her heart pounding. "Daniel, wait!" she called as he pushed through the hospital's rear entrance into a small courtyard used by staff for breaks. The truth was about to explode everything she thought she knew. Daniel turned slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of secrets too long carried. In the afternoon light, Victoria could see exhaustion etched into his features, the bone-deep weariness that came from years of bearing burdens too heavy for one person. "You're a physician," Victoria stated. It wasn't a question. Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Victoria saw the full depth of his anguish. "I was, once, in what feels like another lifetime. What happened?" For a moment, Victoria thought he wouldn't answer. Then Daniel sat heavily on a concrete bench, his head in his hands. "My wife, Elena, was diagnosed with glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor. When our daughter Emma was 3, he began, his voice barely audible. I was a pediatric neurologist here at Mount Sinai, specializing in neuromuscular disorders. Elena was a brilliant researcher, working on experimental oncology treatments. We believed we could defeat it." Victoria sat beside him, close enough to offer comfort, but distant enough to respect his space. "The treatments weren't insurance covered. Experimental immunotherapy, specialized radiation, clinical trial participation. We spent everything. Sold our Upper West Side apartment, liquidated retirement accounts, borrowed against my medical practice. When Elena died 14 months later, I faced $2.8 million in medical debt." The figure struck Victoria like a physical blow. In her world, $2.8 million was a rounding error. In Daniel's world, it had been the price of desperate hope. "I couldn't maintain my practice anymore," Daniel continued. "Between crushing debt and caring for Emma, she has high-functioning autism and needed intensive support after losing her mother. I couldn't afford the required continuing education credits for license renewal. By the time I could have addressed it, I was working multiple jobs just to keep Emma housed and fed." Victoria's throat constricted. "How long ago?" 4 years. Emma's 8 now. We live in a studio apartment in Queens that costs more than I earn monthly. But Emma's thriving in an excellent school and she's..." She's learning to laugh again. That's worth everything. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Daniel's story bridging the gap between their disparate worlds. You still practice, Victoria observed quietly. Unofficially, Daniel's smile was heartbreaking. These children remind me of Emma. Of myself at that age, actually. I had undiagnosed ADHD until I was 9. I understand what it's like to feel different, to have adults perceive you as broken. Is that why you were so gentle with Mason? Mason has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, Daniel said simply. I specialized in neuromuscular disorders before everything collapsed. I could identify it in his movement patterns, his muscle weakness presentation, but mostly I could see that he's exhausted from being treated like his diagnosis, instead of like a kid who loves dinosaurs and asks endless questions about how escalators function. Victoria stared at him, stunned. You knew? From that first encounter? I knew. And I also recognize that he's at a critical developmental stage where targeted physical therapy and emotional support could dramatically impact his quality of life. Children with DMD who maintain hope and stay physically active often exceed their prognosis by years, sometimes decades. Before Daniel could continue, Victoria's phone erupted with urgent alerts. Her assistant's panicked voice filled the courtyard. Mrs. Sterling, emergency. The FDA just rejected our primary drug application. The IPO is collapsing. The board is convening an emergency session. You need to return immediately. Victoria looked at Daniel, seeing her carefully constructed world colliding with his in ways she'd never imagined. The IPO that had consumed her existence, the company she'd built from nothing, the future she'd meticulously planned, all suddenly seemed fragile against the solid reality of this man who'd sacrificed everything for love. I have to go, she said, standing reluctantly. Daniel nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. Victoria, I hope your meeting resolves favorably. As Victoria hurried toward her waiting car, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real crisis wasn't in her boardroom. It was in the choice she was about to make between the life she'd built and the life that might actually matter. Victoria's emergency board meeting lasted 5 brutal hours. The FDA's rejection of Sterling Biotech's primary drug application had sent seismic shock waves through the investment community. Without regulatory approval, the IPO was worthless, and 3 years of relentless work balanced on a knife's edge. The FDA demands comprehensive pediatric studies, board member Richard Carlisle announced, his voice cutting through the conference room tension like a scalpel. Specifically, they require evidence that our treatments won't harm children's developing neurological systems. They want data we simply don't possess. Victoria felt her stomach plummet. Pediatric neurological studies required years to complete and demanded specialists who understood the delicate relationship between childhood development and pharmaceutical intervention, the exact expertise that Daniel Rivers possessed and had been forced to abandon. What's our timeline? Victoria asked. 8 weeks to submit a preliminary research proposal, or they'll permanently reject the application. Frankly, Victoria, I don't know any research team capable of producing that caliber of proposal in 8 weeks. Pediatric neurology is incredibly specialized, and the qualified experts are already committed to other projects. As the meeting devolved into damage control discussions, Victoria's mind raced. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway, dialing the one person who might provide answers. Dr. Sarah Chen answered immediately. Victoria, is Mason all right? Sarah, I need confidential information about that maintenance worker, Daniel Rivers. What do you know about his background? There was a pause. After today's incident in the playroom, I conducted research. Victoria, Daniel Rivers isn't merely any janitor. He's Dr. Daniel Rivers, formerly one of the East Coast's most promising pediatric neurologists. He published 49 papers on neuromuscular disorders before vanishing from the medical community 4 years ago. Victoria's pulse accelerated. Neuromuscular disorders? Specifically Duchenne muscular dystrophy and related conditions. Victoria, he was developing groundbreaking treatment protocols that could have revolutionized everything for children like Mason. His research was terminated when he lost his position here, but his preliminary findings were extraordinary. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the universe shift around her. Sarah, I need his home address. Victoria, what are you considering? I'm considering, Victoria said slowly, that sometimes the answer to everything has been right in front of you. Emptying trash receptacles and making sick children smile. 2 hours later, Victoria stood before a modest apartment building in Queens, holding a folder containing Daniel's published research and a proposal that could save both Sterling Biotech and her son's future. But would Daniel agree to return to the world that had abandoned him? Victoria climbed 3 flights of worn stairs to apartment 3B. The building was nothing like her Manhattan penthouse. Cracked plaster walls, flickering fluorescent lighting, the sounds of families living without wealth's cushion. Daniel answered the door looking exhausted, still wearing his hospital maintenance uniform from the night shift. Behind him, Victoria glimpsed a tiny, immaculate apartment filled with a child's artwork and medical journals stacked on every available surface. Mrs. Sterling, is Mason okay? Mason's fine. Daniel, I need to discuss something that might sound impossible. She entered the apartment and met Emma, Daniel's 8-year-old daughter, sitting at a small table, meticulously drawing with colored pencils. Emma looked up with serious dark eyes, studying Victoria with the intense focus children bring to new situations. Emma, this is Mrs. Sterling, Daniel said gently. She's Mason's mom. Remember the brave boy I mentioned from the hospital? Emma nodded solemnly, then returned to her artwork, a detailed drawing of stick figures in white coats surrounding one small figure in the center. Is Mason still hurt? Emma asked without looking up. Victoria knelt to Emma's eye level, feeling a rush of tenderness for this child who'd lost her mother and lived with the uncertainty of her father's struggles. Mason is improving, thanks to your dad's kindness. Daddy helps lots of kids, Emma said matter-of-factly. He reads me stories about sick children who get better because someone believed in them, like Mommy used to do. Victoria felt her throat tighten. She looked up at Daniel, who was watching his daughter with the expression of a man whose entire universe could fit in one small room. Daniel, I need to make you an offer, Victoria said, standing and opening the folder she'd brought. Sterling Biotech needs a pediatric neurologist to lead our DMD research program. The FDA rejected our drug application because we lack expertise in pediatric neuromuscular disorders. Daniel's face went pale. Victoria, I can't practice medicine anymore. My license expired and can be reinstated. I've already consulted with the Medical Licensing Board. Sterling Biotech will cover all fees, continuing education requirements, and provide a legal team to expedite the process. Daniel, we need you. But more importantly, children like Mason need you. She spread the research papers across his small kitchen table, his own published work, studies he'd begun but never completed, protocols that could revolutionize treatment for children with degenerative muscle disorders. This is your research, Victoria continued. Work you started before circumstances forced you to stop. Daniel, what if you could finish it? What if you could help not just Mason, but hundreds of children like him? Daniel stared at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. Victoria, I've been away from practice for 4 years. The field has advanced, evolved. I'm not the physician I used to be, but you're still the man who sees past a diagnosis to the child underneath. You're still the person who makes kids laugh when they're frightened. And your research, Daniel, it was brilliant, revolutionary. With Sterling Biotech's resources behind it, you could change everything. Emma suddenly looked up from her drawing. Daddy, would you be a doctor again? The question hung in the air as Daniel faced the choice between safety and the chance to reclaim his purpose. Daniel knelt beside his daughter's chair, his voice thick with emotion. "What do you think, sweetheart? Should Daddy try to help more kids like Mason?" Emma considered this with 8-year-old gravity. She held up her drawing, the stick figures in white coats with the small figure in the center now clearly smiling. "That's you. Daddy," she said, pointing to the tallest figure. "And all the kids you're going to help. Mommy always said helping people was the most important job in the world, and you make sick kids feel better." Victoria watched father and daughter, seeing the love that had sustained them through unimaginable loss and hardship. In that moment, she understood that her offer was about more than saving Sterling Biotech or even helping Mason. It was about restoring a brilliant man's ability to heal, to use gifts that should never have been wasted. "There's something else," Victoria said quietly. "Sterling Biotech operates an on-site educational facility with specialized programs for children with developmental differences. Emma could attend school there while you work. The position offers $1.2 million annually, plus comprehensive medical benefits, research funding, and a signing bonus to clear your existing debt." Daniel's eyes widened. The figure represented complete freedom. Freedom from debt, from worry about Emma's future, from the crushing weight of unused potential. "Why?" Daniel asked simply. "Why would you risk your company on someone like me?" Victoria smiled, thinking of Mason's face when he talked about the janitor who made him feel whole. "Because sometimes the most important discoveries aren't made in laboratories or boardrooms. Sometimes they're made in hospital corridors by people who understand that healing is about more than just medicine. It's about hope." Daniel looked at Emma, who had returned to her drawing, adding more figures around the edges, a growing family of healers. "That's our new team," Emma said seriously. "People who help each other believe in impossible things." Daniel Rivers closed his eyes, and when he opened them, Victoria saw the pediatric neurologist emerging from beneath 4 years of survival and sacrifice. "When do we start?" 18 months later, Victoria stood in the gleaming research wing of Sterling Biotech, watching Daniel lead an international team of researchers through Phase 2 clinical trials of his revolutionary DMD treatment protocol. The Rivers method combined targeted gene therapy with innovative physical rehabilitation, producing results the medical community had deemed impossible. Emma attended the company's Specialized Academy, where she was flourishing in an environment designed for children who learn differently. She'd become the unofficial mascot of the research wing, her drawings decorating laboratory walls and her innocent questions often sparking breakthrough insights. And Mason was not just walking. He was running, not perfectly, not without occasional assistance, but running nonetheless. Daniel's combination of cutting-edge treatment, targeted therapy, and unwavering belief in Mason's potential had produced results that had revolutionized the entire field of neuromuscular medicine. "Mrs. Sterling," Emma appeared at Victoria's elbow, holding a carefully drawn picture. "I made this for the medical journal." The drawing showed the Sterling Biotech building surrounded by stick figures of children, some in wheelchairs, some on crutches, some standing tall, all smiling broadly. At the center stood 4 figures holding hands: Victoria, Daniel, Mason, and Emma. "The magazine wants to put it on the cover," Emma explained with 8-year-old pride. "They said it shows what hope looks like." Victoria accepted the drawing with tears in her eyes. "Emma, this is the most beautiful scientific illustration I've ever seen." Through the laboratory window, she could see Daniel working alongside Mason, guiding the little boy through advanced physical assessments that would have seemed miraculous just 2 years earlier. Mason was laughing, his face radiant with the confidence that came from being valued for who he was, not limited by what he couldn't do. The Sterling Biotech IPO had been a historic success, valued at $6.2 billion, or in driving international investment in pediatric research. The Elena Rivers Foundation, established in memory of Daniel's late wife, had funded treatment for over 3,000 children with rare diseases. Victoria's company had become the global leader in pediatric neuromuscular research. But Victoria knew that the real victory wasn't measured in stock valuations or market capitalization. The real victory was in the sight of a brilliant man reclaiming his purpose, a little girl learning to trust again, a sick boy discovering that his limitations were not his destiny, and a woman finally understanding that success wasn't about what you could build, it was about what you could heal. Victoria Sterling had spent her entire career believing that achievement meant constructing something bigger, reaching higher than anyone thought possible. But standing in that research wing, watching two children play while their parents worked to heal the world, she finally grasped the truth. True success wasn't about what you could earn. It was about what you could give. And sometimes, if you were extraordinarily fortunate, the most important discoveries weren't made in boardrooms or laboratories. Sometimes they were made in hospital corridors by people brave enough to see past the surface to the healing that waited underneath. Mason ran over to Victoria, his face flushed with exertion and joy. "Mom, did you see? I ran the whole length of the lab without stopping." Victoria knelt and gathered him in her arms, marveling at the strength in his small body. "I saw everything, sweetheart. You're absolutely incredible." "Daniel says I might be able to play soccer next year," Mason said, his eyes shining with possibilities that had once seemed impossible. Real soccer, with other kids. Victoria looked over at Daniel, who was watching their embrace with the satisfied expression of a man who had found his way home. Emma skipped over and joined their impromptu family huddle, her latest drawing clutched in her small hands. "Look," Emma said, holding up the picture. "I drew our family." The drawing showed four figures standing in front of the Sterling Biotech building, but this time they weren't just holding hands. They were surrounded by dozens of other children, all smiling, all strong, all filled with hope. "That's everyone we're going to help," Emma explained with matter-of-fact certainty. "Because families aren't just people who live in the same house. They're people who help each other believe in impossible things." Victoria Sterling smiled through her tears, finally understanding that the most important mergers weren't between companies. They were between hearts willing to heal the world, one child at a time.